Hey everybody, this is Joe Harper with Reformed Truther Ministries. In today's video, we are talking about ancient petroglyphs from the American Southwest. So I have some cool footage here that I took from my expedition to New Mexico to the American Southwest. Um, I took my trip there back in November last month, and it was a great trip. And the purpose of the expedition was primarily to investigate the UFO phenomenon, the quote gray aliens, and everything associated with that. But while I was down there, I did have the chance to go and investigate some ancient Pueblo petroglyphs outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And this was a really cool part of the research and expedition that I got to do. Now, for editing purposes, I didn't put some of this footage into my initial video that I put out called Hunting After the Grays in New Mexico, but I've decided to share some of this footage in an additional video here today, and I think you guys will think that it's pretty cool because with a lot of the stuff we've been talking about on RTM recently, there's a lot that's really relevant for our discussions. For one, there's been more of an anthropological and archaeological and ancient history emphasis on the channel in general, so this certainly lines up with that. But even with some of the other stuff that we've been talking about, such as giants and the antediluvian world and all this stuff, there's some really cool things that people have talked about the American Southwest that relates to these topics, such as the disappearance of the Anasazi peoples, who were this pretty sophisticated ancient Pueblo civilization in the American Southwest, and they mysteriously disappeared. And people have questioned why, and even medicine men from some of the tribes in the American Southwest, the Pueblos or the Hopis or the Navajos, have told stories of medicine men practicing black magic, opening portals, giants coming out. Some have even speculated that that is the cause of the disappearance of the Anasazi, and I think that's possible, even though I'm not dogmatic on that by any means. And even with other things related to cryptids or other um, other topics of that nature, that we know that there are tribes in the American Southwest where there have been magical or mystical practices of shape shifting. We have the legends and the stories of the skinwalkers that come out of the American Southwest that's often been attributed to magic or to sorcery that's practiced amongst the tribes down there. So there's just a lot to learn about the American Southwest. I think there's a lot of really good material to be gleaned from researching those American tribes from an anthropological basis, in a historical basis, learning about their culture, their way of life. There's a lot to be gleaned from that. And, it was really interesting when I drove up to Dulce on day two. And I didn't talk about this so much in my initial video, is that I drove through the Apache Indian Reservation, and I drove through it for about 3 hours each way. So 3 hours through the Apache lands to the north, and then I did the U-turn and came back down to Albuquerque, and I didn't have any troubles or nothing. But it was really interesting as I was driving through some of that Native American land. I saw not one but two separate billboards talking about the frequency of kidnappings and murders of young Native American women, and there were 1-800 numbers. And that was something that I had certainly not been aware of. And even when I got home after the expedition, I kind of started doing some research into that. And I don't pretend to know what the cause of that is, but in my head, even my gut instinct said that there could be, even to that frequency of kidnappings and murders. In my head, I thought there's a possibility there could be at least in some cases, an occult emphasis or motivation to some of those things. But I, of course, could be wrong. But that was something that was really, really interesting. But I want to talk about these petroglyphs here. I'm going to show this footage here in a second, but I wanted to give a little bit of this emphasis because with the footage I'm going to show, I think it's pretty frequent. But I wanted to give some preface to it just so it all makes sense before I show the footage. But yeah, the ancient Pueblo peoples, they lived in the American Southwest for thousands of years, around the Rio Grande, in that in that region of the American Southwest. And these petroglyphs, they're rock paintings that you see. They're carved onto the rocks, and they portray some of these different symbols of you know relative of different significance, sometimes religious significance, or sometimes depicting cultural things or whatever else. And some of these petroglyphs are as old as 2000 BC. That's the oldest ones go back to as far as 2000 BC, if not earlier. So some of them are very, very old. Now, some of them are much, much more recent, because, like I said, the Pueblos lived in the American Southwest, close to the Rio Grande, for over 1,500 years. And then from 1300 on, their population of the Pueblos in the region it increased. But between 1300 and the 1600s, that many of the petroglyphs were also carved by other Native American tribes, such as the Navajo or the Apache, that were in that area. And then obviously from the 1500s and 1600s, that's when um, you get the Spanish coming in. And it was interesting as I was researching some of the history of this region that, in the 1680s, the Spanish came in and they really enslaved a lot of these American tribes, forced them to do forced labor, such as the Pueblos in the region. And they also enforced their Catholicism onto these Native American tribes. And this is what the Spanish did this all throughout the New World. And there was a revolt around 1680. So that was really, there's a lot of really interesting history that went on in this region before the establishment of the United States, before the expansion of the United States west into the region. There's a lot of history that predates it. So I find there's just so much that we don't get taught in our American school system, and it's really good to get into it. But yeah, but these petroglyphs, they often will have ceremonial or religious significance. Even to the tribes today, they often have religious or ceremonial significance. And one thing that I read that was really interesting is that the orientation of these stones, or the direction of these stones relative to other petroglyph stones, or to the landscape or the horizon or just the area around them, can be as significant as the picture themselves. An example of that: many of these stones face east, to face perhaps the rising sun, because that would have religious uh, significance. I even talk about that in the footage I'm going to show. And I don't pretend to be a complete expert on all of that, but I still think that's really, really interesting. So, all that being said, I don't have too much more I need to say on this. It may be something that I may go back and do more research on, or even return to the American Southwest at some point, because it's really what I've been doing, guys, the past years. Is I've been going and making videos on a lot of different topics, and I kind of know it's possible that at some point the Lord may say to me, Joe, you're going to hone in on a certain topic, hammer down, and go a lot closer. Now, that may or may not be a topic like this, but you never know. And so it's just really interesting to see what we're going to keep learning and what directions we're going to go as we continue to do all this historical and anthropological research on all these different topics. So, all that being said, guys, I hope you enjoy this footage of ancient petroglyphs in New Mexico in the American Southwest. So, enjoy the rest of the video.
All right, everybody, we are at the Petroglyph National Monument. We're going to be hiking here for about an hour before we drive up to Dulce. And this is going to be really interesting because what petroglyphs are, for people who do not know, is they are essentially these ancient rock paintings that are images that are on the rocks here in this region, the American Southwest. And it's believed by anthropologists that they were created by the ancestors of today's Pueblo peoples. And you'll remember that what's really interesting about this, when we were at the Roswell Museum yesterday, which is, you would think it's a completely different topic entirely, they were showing those ancient petroglyphs, which they were attributing to ancient Hopi peoples, that they were portraying what appeared to be gray aliens. So even though I don't think I'm necessarily going to see those type of specific petroglyphs on this hike, though, it's still regardless very interesting to see these type of petroglyphs, the same type of things that were getting talked about in the museum yesterday. So that'll be good, and I think it'll just be enjoyable in general. You know, look at that. You see that balloon back there? That's cool. It's just this trip has just been full of adventures, man. Whether it's dodging trucks on the road due to ice in the American Southwest, you think that's something to run into in Minnesota, or I saw guys riding horses down the trail yesterday. There's just been so much adventure. So we're going to see what the rest of the day has in store. Stay tuned. We got an ancient petroglyph here created from the ancestors of today's Pueblo peoples. Here's some more of these petroglyphs. These are just really fascinating stuff out here. This is some really good information on the petroglyphs. You see here how it says, notice that these prehistoric petroglyphs face south or southeast. Perhaps the placement was deliberate to the orientation of the daily rising sun. So veneration of the sun, or the holding up of the sun, that's something that you see with cultures all around the world, and that goes back to Babylon, the Tower of Babel, the antediluvian world, and all of that. So that's pretty interesting here that they're saying that that's what's going on, that these petroglyphs are always facing potentially toward the rising sun. That's pretty interesting. These petroglyphs are so cool, and there's a lot of these trails. I could easily spend the whole day here. I'm gonna have to get moving if I'm gonna keep on pace to make it to Dulce. But yeah, this has been really something to see. It's just, this whole trip, I don't know what it is. It's just been like, there's just New Mexico, it just has such a different feel, obviously from the Midwest, but I just feel like there's a lot of history here, and there's just a lot of stuff going on, even spiritually, if that makes any sense. Like some of it bad, obviously. We're talking about gray aliens, but obviously it's just a very unique part of the world.
If you enjoyed this video, then check out our website at www.reformedtruther.com.